Welcome to Empathetic Educators, Season 1, Episode 1. And I am so excited that we have the first part of our Richard Gerver episode today. He is an author of so many influential books, and the book we're focusing on this week is Change. Now, I know this book has impacted so many people around the world, and I am definitely on that boat. This book gave me so much inspiration, especially during challenging times, especially in my first year of teaching. And fun fact, I have now read this book more times than my favourite book, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. For this book review, I'm on my 7th time reading it, so that's how much I love it. We'll get straight into the session. We begin by talking about experience and exposure. And Richard talks about the fact that exposure is so important, exposure to places and people and things, and then experience so that we can understand other people's opinions, other people's ways of life. And yeah, you can see my top tip takeaways in like the timestamps down below, or if you're listening to the podcast, you can see it in a little blurb, just so you can skip forward to parts that you might be more interested in. And you can also see that in the app. Don't forget to download the app because that's all there in the one place as well. So let's get to it. Let's enjoy.
I think it's true. I think it's fundamentally one of the most important issues of our time, because I think what we're seeing in the kind of big geopolitical sphere at the moment is a massive generational gap, right, between generations who are wanting to renationalize, to become insular again, to be monocultural, who are threatened by multiculturalism. And what we're then seeing is a younger generation for whom multiculturalism is just normal, right? It's not even a thing. I mean, if you ask kids about multiculturalism, what are you talking about? And you have to explain it to them. They go, I don't get it. And what's really interesting is we're seeing that clash, because actually the perversion is we're seeing an ignorance in the generation, I suppose, above mine and beyond, backwards, because people never traveled. All they glean about cultures are what they read in highly curated forms, right? Or kind of glossy travelogues, which really, and so the suspicion and fear of the unknown, which goes back to the change thing, really, because that whole thing around change is just, it's fear of the unknown more than anything, right? And feeling a lack of control, and so that's been amplified. And you're right, what we've got to do is, moving forward, make sure that all our kids are really tuned in to as many experiences as they can, multiculturally, multi-generationally, multinationally, because that's how we heal the world. We don't heal the world by preaching at people or telling people. You only heal the world, you only heal through experience. And I think, you and your partner are you're that kind of pioneering generation who can best do that. That ability to broker is something I envy.
Yeah. This is exactly like what me and Rob were talking about last night, is like that's what we need to teach. Like fear, like all the things that are happening at the minute, like in all different parts of the world, is fueled by fear. Like that's not knowing what other people are bringing to the table and just like thinking that so like that critical thinking like piece that we're trying to teach kids now is like, what are you telling me, what are you showing me, and what do I know, but then how can I learn from each other? And like that's what it is. It's not coming and saying I know I'm right, you're wrong. It's like, what do you know, and what do you think, and what does the other person know, and what does the other person think, and then bringing that together. That's what we need to be teaching people. It's not even children, it's actually adults as well, because the adults have had their experience.
That's exactly the issue. And one of the things that I've decided I'm going to try and champion in 2020 is I want democracy and civics to become a legal requirement in all schools around the world. And what I mean by that is not kind of small democracy and civics. It's about big things. I was talking to a friend of mine. Do you know Guy Claxton? Have you come across Guy Claxton? Wow. Building Learning Power.
Okay.
You must look up Guy Claxton's work. You'd love it, given what you and Rob are talking about. Guy Claxton, for me, is the world's leading expert on teaching of critical thinking in schools. He's a contemporary of Ken's. He's been working around the whole sphere about building learning power, critical thinking in education for, I don't know, 40 years maybe. But we were talking about this just the other day, and saying that what we've got to fight for is, and you're right, not just children. There has to be a way that we look at the problems we're facing and realize it's to do with education, right? I mean, it's really interesting. I'll come on to this bit in a minute. Loads of things interesting. But, you know, what you're saying is absolutely right, because that ability to be critical is exactly what we need to develop in our kids, because it's not what was developed in us. And I mean my generation and backwards, right? But what's really scary is a lot of governments are trying to re-engineer systems to go back to a very by-rote traditional system, because they've worked out that they don't want people to be critical thinkers, right? There's another person you should look up, is someone called Manoush Shafiq. Manoush Shafiq was this close to breaking one of the great glass ceilings in British society by, I think she came second she was second in the interview process to be the first female governor of the Bank of England. She's currently the director at the London School of Economics. She was actually, I think, the deputy governor for a while. And she talked about this at Davos in 2018, which is really interesting. And that is that the education, people who are following populism and nationalism aren't stupid, right? But what they've realized is that the education system is not built in their favor. And that's partly the issue. So this ignorance thing is fascinating, right? And then brings me to another name drop, Naomi. I'll do this also. In November, I had the opportunity to have lunch with Robert Kennedy Jr., who is Bobby Kennedy's son, Jack Kennedy's nephew. And he's one of the world's leading, well, he's probably the world's leading environmental lawyer. And he made a really interesting point to me over lunch. We were talking, you can imagine, just talking politics with someone like him was like mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But what he said was, in 2006 in the US, up until 2006, it was a legal requirement to teach democracy and civics and critical thinking around democracy and civics in all schools it was a federal law in the US. And in 2006, it was scrapped. And he said, if you now look at the way that populism has been exposing the weaknesses of not teaching critically how to understand anything and challenge anything that somebody brings to you, it's beginning to really be exposed. And for me, I don't think there's a more important argument to be had than, are we teaching our children to challenge everything properly and constructively?
Well, like the media, if you take face value of what the internet shows you, then you're not actually look what happened in so many countries. Like, we could really get into politics like time here, but like, it's like, if you look what happened, like if people aren't thinking about what's in front of them and just taking it for fact, then bad things can happen, because like they can tell people anything. And then,
well, just look at social media. I mean, social media is the classic example, right? Where what you're seeing are echo chambers and the analytics. You know, people talking about Donald Trump as being stupid, and he is. But the people around him are probably the most brilliant political manipulators in history. There'll be books written about their genius, right? Because what they did by using social media in the way they did and using complex analytics, people don't realize at the moment that AI has reached a level with social media where you are now able to map human emotions in algorithms. Right, so they are algorithmically able to understand your emotions by the language you use in a social media post and react to it. Right, so what we also have to do is help children understand that context. That you know, we need our kids to be truly skeptical. In other words, we need them to be learners, actually, because learners are skeptics, right? The whole point of being, you know, world-class scientists are skeptics. World-class anything are skeptics, because your job is to constantly challenge convention, and that's curiosity. Kids under 5 are the world's greatest skeptics because they challenge everything, right?
Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? What are you doing?
Why are you doing that? But why? Yeah, but why? But why? And eventually you just go, because I say so.
Take what I say.
Go to yeah, you're right. And I think so. I think, you know, so tell me about your, like, because as well as teaching, you've got a podcast, is that right?
Well, like that's I just mentioned, like, for this, so like I think I told you on the email, but like I hope you don't mind, but I'm recording this for the actual session as well, but then I'll send you everything through. But
perfect.
But like, so I wanted, like I said, whenever I first was in England, like really crashed and burned, completely like was not myself for that first year. And so like since then I've really been looking to why I changed, like why I personally changed as a person from being this happy, positive person to like really not being in a good space. And so instead of doing it in a negative way, I wanted to understand like that happens to a lot of people, and like I didn't really know what was happening to me. So I got interested in the neuroscience behind it. So like the brain and like what was happening to my brain. And so I wanted to start, I was like interviewing people, talking to people, but I thought this could be something like people need to know about what I'm having. Like it's just me having the conversation, but like people could really benefit from hearing these conversations. So I just started recording it, and it turned in, now I'm doing a podcast and YouTube channel where it's like I'm interviewing people to try and see if there's commonalities between, so like neuroscientists, researchers, educational researchers, teachers, we're all like psychologists. We're all kind of in pockets of like around, but no one's like interlinking. And I think that's what I'm hoping to get from like this is empathy comes from understanding and awareness. So if we can try and make connections between all those different spheres, that's why that's where I'm hoping like this will come together, and like we can, I don't know what's gonna come out of it. I don't know what will be the outcome of, I don't even know what I'm looking for. I just know that, like you're saying, being a learner, asking those questions, that's what I'm trying to achieve is. And I think as teachers, my biggest failure was once I stepped out of university, I expected to be a teacher. Like that was my biggest thing, was like I didn't have to ask questions anymore. I knew what I was doing. I'm a teacher now. And I think that's what we need to, what I personally believe we need to help teachers realize is we need to keep being learners the whole time, like you know, until the day we stop it. And as educators, we need to keep asking questions. And I think that's what I'm hoping to achieve is modeling that, because there's so many teachers around the world that are doing this. And I think modeling that as long as we can keep asking questions, that will help us be better teachers, but also better people. That's a hope.
I think what you've hit is really important. And again, it's partly a failure of the system and our societal model, which is the ridiculous belief that education, depending on what stage you get to or which route you choose, right? Education finishes at 16, 18 or 21, right? Or, you know, for the majority, I know there are people that go on to study in further and higher ed when they're older, but that somehow education is finite. And it finishes at the point at which you gain, whether it's you know, exam grades, whether it's a university degree, whether it's a professional qualification, and in a teacher's case, it's often a degree linked to a professional qualification, right? That actually this model that we've been sold, that education stops then and life begins, work begins, a different track, is probably one of the greatest things we have to challenge, and became even more into focus during the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, the global crisis, when that was the moment, it was a catalyst for something that was happening anyway, which was to amplify the fact that the world has never stood still, but it's never moved as fast as it is now, and it's accelerating exponentially, right? And therefore, this idea that you're ever educating anybody for certainty is done. And I think within education, the really important thing is for me to remember that our moral responsibility, actually, above all things, you know, we can have debates and conversations about whether education should just be about helping children understand the joy of learning, the absorption of culture, of knowledge, of whatever else it is, which are all valid, right? To me, if you strip all of that back, the number one most important moral reason for mass education is to prepare children to cope with the challenges of their future. Now, if as an educator, your job is to help to prepare children for the challenges of their future, then you have to realize that the future you were preparing kids for when you finished training, even 4 or 5 years ago, is not the future we're training our kids for now. And therefore, we have to remain not just flexible, but we have to remain deeply curious. We have to have the confidence to challenge ourselves, because ultimately, you know, all a teacher is really is a kind of translator of complex stuff, right, into stuff that's tangible for young people. But also, we're lead learners, and any teacher that isn't prepared to step out of their comfort zone on an hourly, daily basis, frankly, has no validity in the classroom, because you should never expect anybody else to do stuff you're not prepared to do. Doesn't matter what age the kids are, if you're not prepared to step out of your comfort zone and take a risk. Because again, if you think about it, that's all learning is, right? Learning, I mean, I've said, one of my mantras is you never learn anything new from getting something right. You only ever learn something new from the point of a mistake or the realization you don't know something new, you can't do something, right? And so as teachers, the problem is we spend too long thinking our job is to control all of our parameters. And actually, one of the really important, and I think one of the most freeing things from your experience as a young teacher, and by the way, my daughter is now in her 2nd year of teaching, so I'm seeing it kind of firsthand as a father, as well as a former professional and teacher trainer and all the rest of it, is this pursuit of perfection, which also, by the way, I think is very dangerous, more so amongst current generations. And I hope this isn't, I'm not saying this in a patronizing, you know, look at me, I'm wiser because I'm older way, but I think things have changed. And I think you go back to things like social media, right? There is now the pursuit of perfection, I think, has become more amplified in the current era than it ever has been, because what we're seeing are beautifully curated lives. I wrote a blog on this
I
month.
read it, yeah, I read yeah.
Beautifully curated lives, right? And therefore our belief is somehow that we're failing because that becomes our ecosystem. And therefore, our belief as a young teacher is we go on social media, we hook up with other teachers, we use Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever else it is, right? And we see stunning classrooms and gloriously happy teachers, and teachers talking about the wonderful lessons, and then more experienced teachers who have become edu Twitter stars and all this kind of stuff, right? And we feel that's what we've got to be. And the truth is, like any job, to me, teaching's a craft. It's not something that can be taught in a lecture hall or anywhere else. It's a craft. And it's something like any craft, like a great artist or a great writer or a great dancer, or a great scientist. It takes years of learning. And
I think in education, whenever we're taught to be a teacher, like for example in England, you have to get outstanding lessons in your first, you're automatically looking to get that high grade, but like that's not the way it works. Like if you were getting outstanding, like I wouldn't even say I'm outstanding now. Like it's no. like you have to keep learning. I think that's what we're graded against, and that's automatically put in our brain.
But I think that's the danger of that kind of grade is really important, because I used to encourage in my teachers the kind of mindset I used to have in myself, because I was fortunate, particularly in my time as a principal. I had unbelievably talented teachers. I mean, they made me look great, right? My whole reputation is built on the genius of the staff that I worked with.
One of my top tip takeaways from this session, there's so many for this first part, is definitely the pursuit of perfection. So one of my goals as part of Empathetic Educators is to obviously share the good times, but also share the not so good and the lows as well, because I think that's really important. I think it's no problem to share all your amazing times that you have, but I think many of us seek approval of others, and that's whenever it can get a bit tricky. So I really want to take the opportunity to share the highs and the lows, and I'll be doing that in my blog posts I'll be releasing on Sundays. Just my reflections of the week and my journey so far. So yeah, you can see that in the app. You can download the app and it'll all be in there too. So what were your top tip takeaways? What did you agree with? What maybe didn't sit the same with you? I'd love to hear your insights and your comments. So make sure you can leave a comment down below, or make sure to subscribe if you think that there was a lot of value in this video and you want to hear more. Share your tweets on Twitter at Naomi_Toland, or on Instagram Naomi.m.t. I look forward to hearing from you, and remember, our choices have an impact. So what impact are you going to have? See you next week.